Hello, my name is Barry Horner, and I'm your host on today's episode of Steak and Soul, the podcast that's dedicated to demystifying the world of employee ownership. Stake refers not just to the financial or beneficial ownership, but also the vested interest, the sense of responsibility, and the feeling of belonging that comes with being an employee owner. Soul is all about the company culture, the values, the shared purpose, and the human connection that are amplified and shaped by employee ownership. Soul is the company's silent language. Join me as we sit down with business leaders, dedicated employees, and expert advisors who have successfully navigated their journey to employee ownership, and those who make the EO community thrive every single day. Today we are joined by a man who has spent 44 years proving that you can run a retail empire without sacrificing your values, and who recently made one of the most significant legacy moves in British high street history. In 1981, our guest and his wife Catherine opened a single toy shop in Amersham. From that one store, they built The Entertainer into the UK's largest independent toy retailer, with over 160 locations and a global reach. But Gary Grant has never been your typical CEO. He is the man who famously kept stores closed on Sunday to protect family time, refused to stock products that didn't align with his faith, and has quietly gifted 10% of his profit to charity for decades. In September 2025, Gary completed his ultimate act of stewardship. Rather than selling to a private equity or a competitor, he and his family transferred 100% of the business to an employee ownership trust, handing the keys to the 1,900 people who'd helped build it. Today, we are talking to Gary about the soul of that decision and the years of planning that led to it, and the stake that he has left behind for his team. So, Gary, what a great business to be in, toy shops. What led you to set up a toy shop? And following on from that, what was the vision at that point to sort of expand and end up with a significant sort of toy empire, if you call it like that? Or was it just, what led to that? I'm always fascinated by sort of entrepreneur's journey.
Okay, well, let's go back before 1981. My parents were divorced when I was 3, and we moved from Wembley in the shadow of the stadium to Buckinghamshire, to the Amersham area. But we had no money. I worked on a milk float. I worked in a bike shop. And then when I left school at 16 with an O-level in maths, I went to work for the bike shop full time. And we got involved with skateboards when they were first launched in the UK in 1974-75. I was offered some stock from a company near us in Slough that had made skateboard wheels and bearings. I bought them privately, not through the bike shop. I made some money on the bearings. I was recently married. I got married in 78. And during 1978-79, and 1980, over roughly 3 years, we traded a lot of skateboard stock to many different companies, mainly people that were exporting it. But I went to work in January of 1981, and my boss of the bike shop had had enough of my wheeling and dealing, as it were, with skateboards. I got fired. I lost my job in January 1981. Now, with the money that we made in those 2 or 3 years running up to that, Kath and I decided that we would start our own business, and would find a shop somewhere, and we'd open a bike shop, because I knew the bicycle industry really well. Well, that didn't really go well, but what did happen, that the toy shop in Amersham came on the market, and we went to see it, and we decided we'd buy a toy shop instead. The toy shop, the year before we bought it, turned over £35,000. Our first year of operation, we opened on the 5th of May 1981. We turned over £100,000. In year 2, we turned over £250,000. In year 4, we opened a second shop in Beaconsfield. In year 10, we opened our third shop in Slough. Now, in 1991, there was a property recession, retail property recession, and I managed to buy a toy shop from a chain that had gone into administration called Zodiac Toys. But this particular shop was in a shopping centre. So whereas my first 2 shops were in small country towns, this in a shopping centre, completely different style of retailing. The expenses are so much more, but the turnover was so much more. And that's where I got my first taste of,
Right.
this could be quite big.
Amazing. what were the initial challenges that you faced, Gary? Were you essentially funding that with your own cash flow? Were you getting support from banks in those days to roll out your sort of expansion plans?
Yeah, it was so much easier to borrow money back in the 80s and the 90s. In fact, it's only really the last probably 2 decades since the financial crash that the qualifying for borrowing money has really got quite severe. Um, so when we started the business, we were looking to buy the business. We had about £20,000 that we'd made from the skateboard trading. But that's what I needed, that 20,000 to buy the shop, and then I need to stock the shop. So I need £40,000. So I bowled in as you did in those days to the local bank. Barclays was my bank, and I said, look, I need to put £20,000. Um, Now there's a bit more to that story, and the podcast could be 4 hours if we had all the details. But the reality was, in 19 in the early part of 1981, Kath and I were moving from a house that we bought when we were first married in 78 to a house in Amersham. So here I was now with a house move happening, an increase in our mortgage costs. I'd lost my job. I still managed to convince Barclays Bank to lend me £20,000 secured on the house that I hadn't yet quite finished buying, with mortgage that I was getting that was guaranteed by the salary that I now wasn't having. So it was a little bit like a pack of cards, but it all held together. And my bank manager's secretary from all those years ago, Pam, who is 94 now, when I see her, she says, I said to the bank manager the day you came in, he's a good lad. You just lend him the money. It will be okay.
What a great story. I'm assuming, Gary, that around that time there must have been competition in the toy space. So what was it that made your business flourish and thrive? Were there any particular USPs in your business culturally, I guess I'm looking at?
Yeah, the market was completely
Right.
different. In 1981, there were like 2,500 independent toy shops around the country. Today, it'll be 10% of those. The major two players in the toy market were Woolworths and Argos, and a smaller player that kept attacking Argos was Littlewoods. But that really was the toy market. You didn't have Toys R Us, you didn't have the internet. The department stores played a much bigger part in the toy market than they do today. But the independent, people used to use their local shops, which is why the high streets today, in many cases, are struggling, particularly in some smaller towns. People aren't using their local shops. They're buying off the internet. The local shops are closing. And when you lose a selection of shops out of the street, those that are left don't thrive because there's not enough. People don't come to the town because not enough going on in the town to draw people in. So if you value your high street, use it before you lose it. And that's really important. And it is the local high street that's the cement that holds our communities together. If you work for a charity or a society, the Scouts, a church group, whatever it might happen to be, if you want some prizes for your raffle, you normally go and tap on the shops in the
Yeah.
high street, and most of them will
Right.
support you. If your high street's not there, you try tapping on the door of Argos or Amazon and asking for a prize for your tombola or for your raffle. You haven't got a chance of getting it. So the retailers in towns do play a really important part as part of the community. And today, a lot of those empty shops have been filled with vape shops or barber shops, or even coffee shops. I mean, how much coffee do we drink
Yeah.
every day? And as coffee approaches nearly £5 a cup, that's quite a lot of money now that's being spent on something back in the early 80s. I think we had one traditional teep in Amersham in those days, and today we've probably got about eight coffee
Sure.
shops.
The title of the podcast is Stake and Soul, looking at both the ownership stake that gets transitioned when you sell the business, but the soul bit is really the culture of the business. And I guess you're famously known for quite a unique culture within the Entertainer that probably reflects yours and your wife's personal values. Maybe we could just dig into that a little bit around what that means to you, how the how your own personal values sort of were reflected in the Entertainer, and again, then that sort of takes us to how, if at all, they were protected when you then transitioned to an EOT in September 2025.
Yeah. Well, as a kid, as I said, I grew up ducking and diving, you know, just trying to make ends meet, or if I wanted a bicycle or my first moped, I had to earn money to buy it. And really, there weren't any rules of the game, really, just make money somehow. Whether it was collecting golf balls off the golf course that weren't lost, or whether it was collecting empty beer bottles and taking them back for the deposits, just making money. And that was the same really for the first 10 years that I was in business. There weren't very many boundaries. It was just make money. And the turning point, which really set the diet as to how we ran our business from a values and a culture perspective, that took a dramatic change in May of 1981. It was exactly 10 years to the day that I went to a men's breakfast at a local church in Amersham. And I'd heard a slightly different presentation of the gospel. And I'm sitting there, I'm 33, thinking, this is bonkers. Nobody's ever talked to me about this faith thing being about a relationship. They didn't teach me that at school. Why weren't they honest with me? They taught me all the stories. I knew that Jesus had turned water into wine and healed the leper, and I knew the stories, but they were just stories. They taught me about history at school as well. But it was just knowledge. But faith isn't about knowledge. Faith is about relationships. And this guy was talking about a relationship with Jesus, and I thought, wow, that's if it's true, there's something in this. So literally, that was the Saturday morning. The Saturday night, I went to find this guy in a local church, because the speaker at the men's breakfast wasn't from the church holding the breakfast. It was from a village about 8 miles away. I went to find him. Didn't end up actually finding him because I went to the wrong church. Didn't realize there was more than one church in the town. And literally sat there through a service, and my life got completely turned upside down. So having had this experience, people talk about life-changing experiences. It was a complete and utter, over a weekend, life-changing experience. It was though something was always there, but I'd never seen it, and all of a sudden I could see it really clearly. And about 6 weeks later, after amazing things happened, they just kept happening. I thought, this is impossible, and if it had been any time before that men's breakfast, I'd have said, yeah, another coincidence. Oh, that's a coincidence. Fancy that happening. That's a coincidence. But afterwards, I think this is ridiculous. The pace in which these coincidences, if you call that, were happening was exponential. And it was just God proving to me, because I'm a black and white person, not in it, that it did exist. So I then went to lunch with a local Christian business accountant, and I sat there and said, David, I don't think I can be in business and be a Christian. They just clash. And he said, well, what do you mean by clashing? And I said, but the way that we do business, the ducking, the diving, and the he said, Gary, it's the way you're running your business that you're concerned about. You can be a Christian, but you've got to tidy up your ways. You've got to sort yourself out. You've got to run a business in a really honest way. And I needed to hear that, really, because our business changed in three significant ways. The first one was how I was operating. I needed to operate in a completely honest way, in a way that everything, if it was ever questioned, it stood up to scrutiny. And most of that probably was around the area of honesty. Doing deals with reps on the side, and all that. It was common practice back in those days. I'm not condoning it for then, and I definitely That hasn't been the way we've operated for the last 35 years. And the second area of challenge was around the products that I stocked. I had a letter from a local school, and it was an essay that they'd asked some 6-year-olds to write. And this particular 6-year-old had written, they had to write an essay about their favourite shop. And this particular lad had written an essay about the Entertainer in Amersham. And the detail in it was it was immense. He could have come and worked for me. He knew everything was probably more than the staff. That really hit me when I had it, because when that arrived, because I thought everything I put on the shelf in my shops, I am endorsing when I sell them to children. They're coming in my shops. They're just children, and therefore, if it's on the shelf, and that they're obviously thinking it's absolutely fine. Why would they? Why would they query whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent? So I thought, Gary, you've got to be really careful about what you're stocking, particularly now through a different filter. You're a Christian, so it's my motive in doing what I'm doing that's the most important thing. Because if I stop selling Halloween because the Lord will replace my lost business in other ways, because I wanted more business, my motive would be gain, and I don't think that works. My motive was to do the right thing, and our business was successful because of that. And I've had that experience over and over and over again over the last 35 years when I've looked at something. Some of them have been really high profile products that I've taken some flack for not stocking. And I've looked and thought, I really just don't feel comfortable with that. That doesn't feel right. Doesn't look right. It does. And there's lots of reasons why, um, when we were running the Entertainer, we did and didn't buy different products. Some of them might look like they were poor value. Some of them might not have been good quality. Some of them, the packaging might have been really poor. There were lots of reasons. So we just had another filter on our product selection, which was our faith. But you need to look at the wider business and say, well, did you just make stances over things that you weren't stocking? And the answer was no, we didn't, because it was a few years later, 4 years, 5 years, 4 years later, in June of 1995, the government changed the Sunday trading laws, allowing stores to open on a Sunday. And I think, oh, crumbs, what am I going to do now? One of the 10 commandments is keep the Sabbath holy. So I prayed about it for about 4 or 5 months. And in the end, I said, look, there's no point. We're not going to open on a Sunday. And it didn't really matter in those early years, because Sunday trading didn't really catch on till when we got into the 2000s. But towards the end of the 1990s, there were a whole number of landlords that wouldn't let the Entertainer open because we would only trade on 6 days a week, and others were trading 7. But as we got into the early 20s, the landlords started taking a slightly different view on the Entertainer, because actually we were really quite good retailers. So they were prepared to have a really good store offering and range for 6 days a week, and the Sundays became less of an issue. And I think that we've probably had 2 stores in the last 5 years where the landlords have said, no, it's 7-day trading, take it or leave it. So that was my third thing. So the first thing was honesty, then there was product selection, and then the third thing was Sunday trading. And if you look a bit deeper into things, because these are all public stances, these are things that are blatantly obvious. Doors locked on a Sunday and haven't got some of the toys that people wanted. But there was lots of other faith fingerprints throughout the business, but they were less obvious because we didn't put it all over the windows. And generosity was one of those things. And the Entertainer has, for the last 35 years, gifted 10% of our annual EBITDA profits to charities. Some that we've started ourselves, others that we know the founders, others that are just doing outstanding jobs. And really, all of the charities we support are, generally speaking, involving people, because life is really tough for people and they need a helping hand wherever they can. So whether that's a food bank, more recently in the last decade and a half, whether it's Restore Hope Latin, which is a charity that we started working with families that are struggling. And for Kath and I, it was easy to start Restore Hope because we both started from really tough backgrounds. And if you can put yourself into somebody else's shoes and you know what they're struggling with and what their opportunities are, and you can help them along that road, they can blossom. But they just need something and I think this is what I've experienced. We all just need people to believe in us. And whether it's been the toy trade where people just backed me, during the financial crisis of 2008, you are challenges. Well, 2008 was a nightmare as a family-owned business. When we entered the autumn and businesses were like going bust every other day, the business news on Radio 4 was the next round of things that weren't working, insurance companies going down, banks going down, this going down, and the lack of confidence drained out of society. And our business in October, it declined by 30% overnight. Now, the last quarter of the year in the toy industry is half your year's turnover. So in the first 9 months you take half, in the last quarter you take half. If you're 30% down in your biggest quarter, you
No.
don't survive. And I didn't have a family. I didn't have an American counterpart to bail me out. We were the family. That was the business. And we had to cut costs in all sorts of ways. We hankered down. We supported everybody as best we possibly could. But then we had the most outstanding December 2008, and we came out of 2008 not having made any money. But at one stage, it looked like we were going to lose £1 million, and that would have been significant for us. So how did we end up with the EOT, which was your question? Well, the next big challenge as a family was COVID. And we came out of Christmas 2019. It was a really good Christmas, and you never build your business with an expectation that next week or next month something that dramatic is going to happen. So you're placing orders and commitments out for buying products probably 6 months ahead. So as we got into January and this thing called COVID really started to take grips, and then we got towards February, and when the government announcing lockdowns, we had commitments to suppliers for money that we owed them for stock that we had already had delivered. We had commitments to suppliers for items that we'd ordered that they'd ordered for us. We had commitments to our staff. We had commitments to our landlords. And all of a sudden, we get told you're closing your business for 17 weeks. Literally no turnover by comparison to how it would have been, because the internet that did stay trading, it was insignificant. It was 10% of our turnover. So in effect, 90% of our income got turned off. So by the end of February, we were starting to lose about £1 million a week. I'm not talking about paying money out for stock that we had. We were physically losing, with expenses and wages and other costs, about £1 million a week. And we were rebudgeting almost twice a week, because the only income we had was the money coming in from the internet sales, which were by this time now dramatically increasing. And I was sort of writing to the staff. We had, as you say, in those days about 1,800 staff, and I was writing to the staff probably twice a week, really, and just trying to tell them what was going on and just keep them encouraged, because they had obviously their mortgage to pay and their food to buy and other bits and pieces. And we had 480 staff that had worked for the company for more than 10 years, and 8 staff had worked for me for more than 20 years. 3 of them for more than 40. They joined us very early on. And entrepreneurs can't build businesses without people that are literally going over the top for them. So when we considered what does an exit look like, if a family had lost everything in COVID, and it looked like we were about to, and say we, the family, as Kath and myself, we've got 4 children, of which 2 of them work in the business. and we've got now 10 grandchildren. This one is 8 months. But we, as a family, we would have lost everything. Even my two children that weren't working in the business, with support that Kath and I were giving them, we probably have all lost our houses. It would have been absolutely everything. And you said earlier on, how did we manage to finance ourselves? Well, largely we just invested the earnings. We just didn't really take much out. We gave money away. I'm not saying I didn't live well. We did have a good life, but we just kept reinvesting. And we sat around the table. It was a Thursday, as it happens, because I was on a Thursday, and we had a family business coach that had been working with us, helping us to develop our processes, procedures, and policies and things. And it was a Thursday, and we started to talk about, well, maybe we should sell the business, because our challenge was, if we only sold a little bit of the business, somebody investing in our business that was just doing a financial transaction, they wouldn't have seen life the same as us. They wouldn't understand the Sundays. They wouldn't understand the product selection. They wouldn't understand making sure we were there for the staff, and try and support the staff. You know, if you employ 1,600 people, you're employing a small community. So we often had 2 or 3 people going through cancer treatment that we needed to support and encourage. And I thought, well, you know, if we just sell a quarter of the business, somebody's going to come and say, but hold on a minute, these things, you know, businesses don't need to do this. And that really challenged me. And what was significant about that Thursday, and about another coincidence possibly, in the morning before the meeting, I'd been speaking to the Salvation Army about some work that we were doing with their mode of presence for prisoners in prisons. And as I was about to put the phone down, the guy from wherever he was in the country, he said to me, Gary, I'll pray for you. So I said, thanks very much, and put the phone down. Now, normally, if I say to people, shall I pray for you? They normally say, yes, please, thinking that maybe tonight I'm going to remember them and pray for them. And I said, right, we're going to do it right now. And they said, what now? So when I put the phone down on this guy and then went into this meeting, I'm thinking, oh, I wondered if he meant he wanted to pray for me now. So I rang him back at lunchtime, and I said, were you going to pray for me now this morning? He said, well, I would have done, but you put the phone down too quickly, but I will pray for you now as you've rung me back. Now, I don't know what he said, apart from, he said, have the strength to do the right thing. And we went back into the meeting after lunch, and I said, I really think that the family should sell this business. And my wife nearly fell off her chair. She said, I never thought I'd ever hear you say that you would consider selling, in effect, what was my life. Kath said, this is our 5th child.
Was the catalyst coming up for you in terms of, you can't carry on running the business forever? Typically, there is a point in time, I guess, in a business, and for me, it was rapidly approaching age 65, and our non-exec said to me a few years beforehand, you know, we do need to have a proper succession plan in place, and I completely agree. For you, what was because it felt like you'd been through you'd been through some really challenging period, you'd come out of COVID actually okay, and one could say, well, if you get to that point, why isn't it upwards and onwards? What led you then to that decision to think now is the time?
Because everything from our family point of view, financial security, was on the line. And I think COVID highlighted just how exposed we were to things outside our control. It was COVID then. We're in the middle of a war now. Plastic prices have doubled in a month. You just can't be sure. The pace of challenge in business, it's getting exponentially faster. And the thing is, they're not even the same. because you learn from one challenge and it happens again. You've been
Yeah.
there before. You've got some experience, but all these challenges are different, and they're happening. uh, As I say, financial crisis, 2008, property crisis, COVID, war now. It's like it's a continual thing that the business having. We've change is a thing that happens in business. It's happened in for us over 45 years. We're always evolving and changing and flexing with the market. But the pace and the degree of change is really challenging. So the catalyst was not that I wanted to give up, not that I thought I wasn't capable of running the business until I was 90, if I was still around. The catalyst was my whole family's security was all tied into this one thing called the entertainer. So then we started to explore, well, what does an exit look like? As I've just explained, could be a partial exit, but then could I really spent the last 35 years building a business with values, and all of a sudden, because I wanted a little bit of money off the table, the values got put to one side. And we said, "Oh, don't worry about those now. Just give me some cash. Yeah, of course we can open on Sundays and all those other." That didn't ring right with me. So we decided no, we couldn't sell a part of the business. We really needed to be selling the whole of the business. So then we engaged some advisors, and they went through the sort of the list, the normal list that everybody would consider, whether it be venture capitalists, whether it be a trade sale, whatever a flaunt, whatever it might happen to be. And we sat there and said, well, that's really not going to work for us, and that's not really going to work for us. And so many of the options would have undoubtedly resulted in a lot of redundancies, purely because if you do a trade sale, you don't need two computer systems. You don't, well, very unlikely to. You probably don't need two head offices, two warehouses, So there would have been consolidation, and that's how one and one makes more money because it all gets merged. We thought, but what happens to our people? And then we looked at maybe floating the business. Well, that would have protected the people, but then all of our values would have been permanently at challenge because we'd have been at loggerheads. People saying, "Well, we've invested in your business and we want you to do this and that." So, okay, right, we don't want to do that either. And then we end up spending some time investigating the employee ownership trust, and we really couldn't find where the
Right.
downsides were. Well, okay, there is one big downside. You don't get paid out on day one. But if yeah, so yes, the family just over 6 months ago moved the business into an employee ownership trust 100%. So it was all of my shares, all of my wife's shares, and all of my children's shares all went into the ownership trust. And over the next decade, we hope that the business will continue to thrive and that it will pay out the deferred consideration. So yes, it is the biggest risk we've ever taken, but it has preserved the most amount of jobs that we could have preserved in any of the other options that would have been available to us. And then you raise one other question, which I think I've done all your questions. You asked about 4 questions all in one go. So here's the up. Okay. So how do I feel about the new management not continuing with exactly the same values as the ones that our family had? And the answer to that is I'm very relaxed about it, purely because we have sold our shares with a delayed payment, but we've technically sold our shares into a trust that operates on behalf of the ex-owners and the staff, and the management need the freedom to run the business the way they believe the business needs to be run for the market that they're currently in. And we've got the most amazing leader who actually worked for 30 years for the biggest EOT in the country, and a couple of other people from that organization are also working within the entertainer now. They know how to engage with the employees. They know how to engage with the external stakeholders, which are the trustees of the trust that owns the shares. They are outstanding businessmen from the point of view of being a businessman, and also they're really good at retailing. So we now watch from the outside. We have no influence. We have no control. In fact, I don't know what the best-selling toys are, which is, after 40 years, utterly frustrating. I don't know what the margin is. I don't know what the turnover is. I don't know when the next new shop's opening. So, So you could say, when people say to me, "Oh, Gary, I hear you've retired," and I say to them, "There's no way I'm retiring." They say, "Oh, you're still involved with the business then?" No, no, no. I'm just doing all the other things I used to do as well as my day job. Uh, and my weeks are as busy today as they ever were without the day job that I had for 40 years. And mainly it comes round to this concept of generosity and in more recent years, I guess this other little word called legacy. And I was I was in Jersey about 10 years ago, and they have like a town centre chaplain there in St Helier, who I knew, and he realised I was on the island. He said, "Go, would you come speak at the Senate's prayer breakfast?" I said, "Oh yeah, I will do. Yeah, yeah, no problems. When is it?" And he gave me the date. I said, "Yeah, no problem." So then I thought, "Oh, what are you going to tell all these really professional people? And you don't have the qualifications to go and speak to them." But anyway, I had this vision really to speak to them on rig, RIG. So I thought at the time, well, and I was looking at the boats, so I thought, oh, I've just got sort of a bit drawn into the boats really, but I don't know anything about sailing. So I still have got no idea what this rig thing meant. So anyway, I was just pondering about this rig thing, and anyway, it came to me as rig. One, R, reputation. Two, I, integrity. And three, G, generosity. And with this concept of legacy, I am really trying to do my very best to live a rig life with guarding my reputation, doing things with integrity, and living a life of generosity as much as I can. So I need this business to do well, this entertainment business to do well, to give me some money so I can give it all away, which is basically what we do. We just recycle the cash that we get. And it's been the most amazing journey. And right now, my biggest project, which is probably taking 2-ish days a week, is a charity that Kath and I started back in 2002, called Restore Hope. We work with children, family, and youth, restoring their hope. Families that are going through tough times for all sorts of different reasons, whether it be financial reasons or relationship problems or challenges with children, families with very little choice. Money gives you choices. As soon as you take money off people, some of our families don't even have enough money to pay the rent and the food. That just isn't, forget power. So holidays aren't even on their agenda. So giving children an opportunity in life to experience something outside their normal life experiences. So we've just 18 months ago bought um, a church that closed down in the middle of Amersham a few years ago. We're converting that into a community hub, which will enable us to move more of our services in right into the middle of Amersham. We bought a 300-acre farm back in 2002. So we've plenty of fields, and we've got a river running through it that the kids go and do pond dipping and catch all sorts of things in their nets, so they can have wide games in there. We do things for the school holidays. We do some food parcels, a bit like a food bank, but we only do fresh food, and we grow a lot of the food that goes in the boxes. We do counselling sessions. We do parenting sessions, debt sessions, and this farm's about a mile and a half off of the beaten track. You get there by car, but a lot of our families don't have cars. But this new centre's right in the middle of Amersham. It's a £6 million project. We've got about we've got over £2 million we've physically have raised. We've got the money. Another £1.1 million has been all but pledged. In fact, even yesterday, that's not 1.1 now, it's 1.35. Another trust confirmed they were giving us £250,000. So my main project now is I want to get this up and running as quickly as I can, because if I miss a whole year, that's a whole year's worth of impact in the lives of children whilst I'm just mucking around raising money. I've got to raise the money, get the building done so we can get on with the projects. And then who knows whether there's, like a passing on of the baton from this Gary to the next Gary who's out there, who's disruptive, dyslexic, and just needs somebody to point them in the right
Yeah,
direction, and might even need to say a couple of words to them, 2 words in particular. Well done.
sure.
So many children just need to hear those words. Well done.
Yeah. Are you missing the life of running that business and seeing it grow and flourish? Or, I've just written a blog around the challenge where sometimes MDs or CEOs' lives are so caught up in the business that when they hit that cliff edge of stepping down, it's like, what does life bring? My sense in chatting with you is that you've always your faith and you've always had things outside the business. But are you, when you wake up in the morning, do you miss the sort of cut and thrust of new toys and building the business?
If you'd asked me that question last August, 2 months before it was going to happen, I would have said, I can't do this. This was just going to be too difficult. I can't do it. I can't. I get up in the morning. I've got my computer on the kitchen table. I've got my iPad on the kitchen table. I've got my phone on the kitchen table. I've got the numbers pouring in. I've got, I was totally consumed by the business, and to think that I wouldn't have all that knowledge. And also, what worried me is that knowledge goes out of date really quickly, and that I know you often hear people say, "Oh, well, we bought our business back 3 years later," and I'm thinking, well, you wouldn't have the knowledge. You don't know how the industry's changed. You can't just step back into the shoes of 3 years ago. It's all moved on. And and then in the last few weeks before the ET happened, I was begging them to let me have what I used to call the Sunday reports, the end of the week reports. Just let me have the end of the week reports. Let me just know what the best selling toys are. Let me know how the different suppliers are doing. And they kept saying, no, you can't have it. Why can't I have it? You're not allowed to have any influence or control. Oh, no, 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 no. I won't have any influence or control, but just give me the information. It's what keeps me humming. The worst thing in the world that could ever have happened was that they agreed to that request, because I would have picked up that report, I'd have taken it apart, and I would have done what I've done for the last 40 years, saying, right, we can make an improvement here, we can change that, buy more of those, don't do this, and I was so as my oldest son said to me, who is actually one of the trustees of the new trust, Dad, if you get the report and you've got all the information, but you're not allowed to talk to anybody or say anything or do anything, what are you going to do with it? I said, I'm by myself mad. He said, yeah, that's why you can't have it. So the best thing they ever did
Right.
was say no.
Yeah.
Because since that date, and I think everybody, family, business, nobody has believed that I've managed to do what I've done. Even I don't. Because it was everything to me, this business. Kath and I started it with absolutely nothing. And we built and built and built and built and built, along with many, many, many other people. And we're really grateful for all those people that helped us. Because a big business isn't about one person. A big business is about the team that make it happen. Um, so no, I often say now when people ask me the question you just asked me, Barry, what do have you missed it? No, I sort of might have missed it, but not really. I've moved on.
But I guess there must be, you're able to do that because you implicitly trust the people to whom you've handed the business to. If you didn't do that, I'm not sure you would have been able to do what you've just done.
No, you're right. I mean, we are really grateful for um, the senior management and just their breadth of business knowledge, because it's more than being a retailer now. When I started, I was just a retailer. But now, just being in business is so complicated that, I think to be a good retailer, you need to be an outstanding businessman being able to deal with all the complexities, the rules, the regulations, just the being in business thing. And actually, your specialism then is retailing or car selling or whatever it happens to be that you're in. you can't just be you you can't just be a trader anymore. And my second oldest son, my oldest son is a chartered accountant, Duncan, and he's the one that put all the processes and the practices and the procedures in place to run a business in a way that was scalable. And my next oldest son and I were the traders, and we just loved getting up in the morning without having any idea what was going to happen that day.
Right.
We didn't know what deals we were going to do. We didn't know what new products we'd be able to stumble across and buy and get put first to market. We were just product and deal people. You can't run a business of our size, because you're right. We had 160 odd entertainers when we did the EOT, but we were also the major toy supplier to Tesco's. All of the toys in all the Tesco's toy departments are supplied by, merchandised by, priced by the entertainer. So in effect, the Tesco's contract, which was about going back to probably 2002, 3, that in effect doubled our business. The complexity of the entertainer today, compared with 10 years ago, is immense. And therefore, you need very, very focused, organized people to be able to do that. And in many ways, the gift of winging it doesn't work with a business
Sure.
that's
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
knocking on a third of a million to 400 million pounds. A massive, massive change from that first year's turnover 44 years ago of 100,000.
Yep. And you communicated it to the team. I could imagine some of the team, albeit you've built a very significant business. So with some of the team, they wouldn't have that sort of deeply personal relationship with you, but you are the figurehead and the founder of that business. How did that land once you said, actually, I'm stepping back and other people are going to take over? Was there, yeah, just what was the reaction to that from your sort of senior team and others that you'd worked so closely with over the years?
Well, the senior team that are in place today have been in place now for about 3 years. So for the senior team, it was probably a breath of fresh air that they could actually get on and do what their job description said. Because for a CEO and for a CFO, and I'm not an accountant, but I can quickly go through a spreadsheet and tell you where things don't quite add up. And certainly from the chief commercial officer, because I'd done all those jobs. I never considered myself to be a CEO. And now I know, as I've seen Andrew Murphy, our CEO, operate. I've never done the job that he's done. He's just doing things. It's a job that, if it needed to be done, it wasn't being done. I wasn't doing it. So it just gave all the senior management team the sort of the bandwidth now to get on and do the things that they want to do without having to report back or have Gary say, what about this? What about that? Have you thought about something else, and don't do this? With regard to all of the other staff, particularly the staff that have worked long term for the company, there were tears. There was like, we did a big presentation day in Birmingham. There were about 350 members of staff at this theatre in Birmingham, and Kath and I did a presentation about how the future of the business looked under the ownership of an employee ownership trust. There'll be trustees who own the business now, not the Grant family, and the management run the business. And I don't know. After we presented to them, and there was some lunch, it was probably an hour's queue for people that just wanted to. And the thing that people most said to us is that you believed in me, you gave us an opportunity. It was a really sobering day, because you don't need, well, you do need the qualifications and the skill sets at the senior level, but for the people that run the shops, You don't need degrees and a string of qualifications to be an outstanding retailer. You just need to have the right attitude and the right commitment. And therefore, if somebody was committed to us and was prepared to get on board and work really hard, they got the job. And we've seen people that started just the number of our middle management now, whether they be store managers, even some area managers that started with the company as Saturday staff or as Christmas temps, and they've left foot in the door and they've proved themselves and they've been recognised and they were promoted. We've got some, well, not we now, but the Entertainer has got some of the best retailers in the country working for them. They've got the most amazing staff team. Well, as I say, our 10-year club, which grew to such an extent that we couldn't get them all together in one place because there were say over 400, and we used to do a north and a south in the end. We used to have a lunch once a year for them all, and it was just great to hear their stories. And they'd say, "Do you remember when we did this go? Do you remember when we tried that? Do you remember something else?" There is so much knowledge, so much depth of understanding within the business that's built up over many years, and that's really what's been really quite humbling, that people did see me as a charismatic leader, really somebody that was, at the conferences that could just get up there and encourage them all and thank them all and all those sorts of things. Um, yeah, it was the last few weeks that, well, no, actually, sorry, there wasn't the last few weeks because that presentation was about the third week in August, I think. So it was about 5 weeks before the EOT actually happened, which was the 26th of September last year.
And you mentioned a moment ago in that what was undoubtedly a very emotional day for you and the team, that it was no longer the Grant family running the business; it was the trust owned the business. What was the structure that you put in place, Gary, in terms of the board and the trust board to sort of protect the amazing legacy that you've created? What does that look like?
I think it has to be said that none of the ways in which we chose to run the business before are the current management are obligated to continue with. So if they don't feel that the holding the 10-year club lunches every year is now part of the future going forward, that's entirely down to them. They haven't taken over the business with any strings attached. But the way in which the structure works, we looked at what does a trust look like, and you, I tell you what we did. I'm not sure quite what the regulations say, but basically we decided that we wanted 3 trustees. We wanted one trustee that would be, um, they've all got to act impartially, but one trustee would be looking after the interests of the exiting shareholders, and would have half an eye on the accounts and making sure that the deferred consideration was front of mind with the management. Was the chairman of the colleague advisory board. So this was a brand new concept within the Entertainer, but the colleague advisory board consists of, I don't know, about 10 or 12 people, and I think they come from different aspects of the businesses. So there might be some shop assistants, store managers, area managers, people representing head office, might be some from the WED team, some from the warehousing team. So they would be a broad spectrum of all the different channels of the business. And they meet together as a colleague advisory board with a chairman. And that chairman, who works within the business, who actually also worked for a large EOT company in the past and had done this role in the past within his previous employment. That chairman is one of the trustees as well. So his primary role is looking after the interests of the staff. And then we employed a completely independent chairman that was a professional trust chairman who knows legally and corporately how this trust should operate, understands how the trust and the business interacts, because the trustees have no power of influence over the company apart from reviewing the budgets. So the management put together the budgets and table the budgets, and the budgets, I believe, you get signed off by the trust. I think they either get monthly or quarterly management accounts where the management demonstrate how they're performing against the budgets that have been signed off. And the trust, I think, the only authority it has with regard hiring and firing, I think, might only be the CEO. Might go as far as the CFO, but I think it might only be the CEO. So if the trust isn't happy with what's going on, then the CEO probably carries the full responsibility of that. But the trust has absolutely no day-to-day operational involvement with the company whatsoever, and cannot tell the management how to run the business. So it is very well structured.
Yeah, really clear. And I suspect that's typical of how most trust boards run. There's reserve matters in the trust deed that are where the trust board have to sign off, like the appointment or removal of a director or the repayment of the deferred consideration to you. But yeah, you've got to allow the management to run the business in a pretty unfettered way, unless there's a belief that they're not running it for the benefit of the beneficiaries, which at that point they may want to step in. You mentioned deferred consideration and the repayment of deferred consideration. I assume before you went down the route of employee ownership, there is a strategy in which there's enough cash in the business allocated to future growth, deferred consideration, and profit share. How did you go about that negotiation? Was that relatively simple? Was it complex? Was it adversarial? How did you go about just making sure that there was enough cash left in the business so that Andrew could grow it and the business would thrive, whilst at the same time, clearly you want to be ideally repaid as quickly as possible?
Nothing was simple about the EOT. And the only people that make any money out of EOTs in the short term are called professionals. And whether it be the legal teams or whether it was the accountancy teams, of which there were a number of high-profile accountancy companies involved, because some people have to act on behalf of the company, some have to act on behalf of the trust, some have to be involved with the ex-shareholders, because there's tax consequences, and nothing was simple. But actually, it was remarkable, because I think the whole process completed within 13 weeks. We set a very, very, very tight time scale. And there was a lot of burning the midnight oil, but it does end up with concessions needing to be made, because otherwise, if there's no time scale, things just get argued on forever and lame. It needs to, if you're going to do an EOT, it needs to happen in a really timely way, because it is a complete diversion from the company's management to be doing this EOT thing, and they've got to be running the business as well. So if it's drawn out, it's bound to have an impact on the performance of the business, or it's not bound to. It may well have an impact on the performance of the business. So we were delighted that it was transacted really quickly. I think we got accused of our motive being tax evasion, which, if that's the right word, you either evade it or
Avoid it.
But avoid it, yeah. Anyway, tax was not a leading consideration. Of course, it helps grease the wheels and make it happen. But what would you rather have? A pound on day one and pay the tax and be able to put it in the bank, guaranteed money, interest being accrued from day one, or taking your pound and accruing over a 10-year period. So that doesn't mean necessarily 10 pence a year, but it might mean 10 pence, 12 pence, 14 pence, 20 pence, 25p, and at the far end, it might be back down to 5. So there's all the risks that you might not be paid because an EOT has lots of conditions that go with it. So, for example, if the trust were to be approached by an outside organization who offered them a really, really rich price for the company, and it gets sold in less than full tax years, the EOT is broken. So all of the tax advantages all fall away, and that decision isn't with the exiting shareholders. That's sitting with the trust. We don't even have a say as to whether that's a good thing. But if somebody came along and offered twice the price of the valuation that the accountants put on the business, the trustees would have to sit back and think, well, it's a really good
Yeah.
price. Why would we not accept
Yeah.
it? But the exiting shareholders get really tied up in knots because not only is the tax then due, but the tax then was due when it was due all those weeks and months ago, and now there's penalties for not paying on time. But we weren't in control of the decision that's been made. Likewise, you have to be a trading company for full tax years. So if the company for some reason stops trading, well, that also breaks the trust. It's not what happens on the day that you do the deal. It has to have longevity to it. So there are a lot of risks. And if you weigh up the tax benefits and you weigh up the risks, if there weren't any tax benefits, the risks would probably be too high, and therefore you probably wouldn't do it. If this EOT goes to plan, the family will be delighted with the price that it's received over those 10 years, but they'll be even more delighted that by then more than 2,000 people, because hopefully the business will keep expanding, are all shareholders in the business, because once that are all beneficiaries from the profit share of the business, because once the exiting shareholders have been paid off, all of the money that's surplus cash within running the business goes to the employees.
Yeah.
It's an absolute winner. So hopefully in 10 years' time, I was sitting there in a deck chair somewhere talking to some of the staff that I did employ all those years ago, who will say, at the time, I didn't know why you did it, but Gary, this is the best thing that you ever did for me as an individual person. Because you look at the number of people where founders have literally picked up the check, picked up the family photographs off the desk and sailed off into the sunset. And all the rest of the staff are just left working in a business that is just a job. But that's not who we are. As I say, I've got the staff that have been with me for the longest are the ones that have made the business into the business that it is today.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of financial juggling that needs to go on at the point when you become employee owned in terms of determining how the pace at which deferred consideration is repaid. But equally, there's some big decisions that Andrew and the team will have to make once you're fully repaid, because there will be other things that cash will need to be allocated to. It doesn't all flow out to the employees. You can't take what would have been the deferred consideration, divide it by the number of employees, because clearly Andrew will want, and the team will want to grow the business, will want to reinvest, will want to strengthen the balance sheet of the business. But it doesn't take away from exactly what you're saying, that no doubt there will be other benefits that they can start to introduce over time. And for the 2,000 people in the business, that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's the cash-free distribution, not the EBITDA distribution. But again, if the management are doing an outstanding job and investing £1 today that makes £5 over the next 5 years, then that's outstanding for the employees, because there will be over time much more free cash to be distributed. And we've seen over the years, if you take John Lewis's, for example, the heydays when they were standing in Oxford Street and they revealed that the bonus this year was 25% of your salary. You think, wow, I worked hard for my salary, but look at this bonus. And okay, it might only now be back down to, I think they might have had a couple of years where it was 0, and this year I think it's only 2. But they are bonuses. As long as the staff consider the bonuses to be a bonus and don't start taking it as an expectation as a part of their salary, every time they get a bonus, then they can do something. I remember we did I can't remember the reason why we did it. We did a profit share to the staff, might have been 10 years ago. And why, I don't know why we did it, but we gave the staff what was actually quite a large bonus. And some of the letters that we had back from staff, like, um, my boiler broke 6 months ago, and my bonuses led me to replace my boiler.
Yeah, amazing.
Um, my mum died, and actually, it enabled me to have a slightly different funeral to the one that I was expecting to be able to give her. And these were like really we employed just normal people up and down the country that just work really hard, that stretch their money and just and they're all that if they're employed, they're probably surviving, but they might not be thriving. And the difference that this employee ownership trust will hopefully do, it will give them those unexpected bonuses when they do start coming through, that maybe will be a special holiday that they didn't think that they'd ever be able to take the children on, or
Yeah.
whatever it might happen to be. And that's when, and Kath says, we always wanted our business to be a blessing to our family, also a blessing to our staff. And over the years that has been the case, and I really hope over the next 10 years it'll be a case more and more and more and more, and hopefully it's businesses that go into an EOT that will attract and retain the very best people, because they really feel valued and they're more than a number on a pay slip.
Yeah, yeah, that's lovely. Is there anything, Gary, as we came onto the podcast today that you thought Barry's bound to ask that? Obviously, we've covered the question around products, Sunday working, and your values, and you've made it really clear that when you sold the business to the trust, that there was a clean break, and they could therefore do what they wanted to do with the business. Was there anything else that you thought, actually, we should really talk about this today? It's so integral to the Entertainer as now an EO business. Or do you think we've covered the key areas?
I think we've covered all the key areas. I can't think of anything that we haven't done. But what I would say, to people considering an EOT, apart from individuals having RIG an objective and a goal, businesses can have RIG as an objective and a goal as well. And I really genuinely believe that businesses can be used as a force for good. We can make instant decisions. We can make even irrational decisions that are the right decisions for our communities and for our staff, that maybe the government can't make. So businesses are in a really unique position to be able to make a difference in society today. So I would encourage anybody that's considering selling their business to at least give an exploration of an employee ownership trust a fair hearing. Don't be totally focused on the fact that you haven't got all your money up front. Be prepared to take a little bit of a risk for the greater good. And if it doesn't work for you, that's absolutely fine, but at least consider it, because there are a growing number of businesses that are doing EOTs, but compared with the number of businesses that are actually sold every year, that percentage should continue to increase, because I'm absolutely convinced it will dramatically change your employees. I heard it said, why are they spending that pound? It could have been ours. It definitely changes people's perception. And the thing is, the more staff you get, the easier it is for money to be wasted. But if everybody is focused on the fact that it's their business, they're having an input into something that will benefit them and their colleagues, I definitely think there's a sort of a psyche change in people's attitude. It moves. It's a slightly different relationship between employee and employer, because it's not quite the same anymore. It's now figuring it out together. So I'd be really interested over the next few years, um, to hear from Andrew the unquantifiable benefits, of an employee ownership trust, where the staff have gone the extra mile because they do consider it's it's owned by them, and that's changed their approach to work, and they've changed their approach to management.
Yeah, I guess it's what the EO community call owner mindset, isn't it? When people start to realize that actually their actions day to day collectively lead to creating a larger pot that then gets distributed to them. There is that owner mindset sense of I am a partner, I am a co-owner in this business, and therefore I can see more clearly how the day-to-day actions that I pursue lead to a bigger pot at the end of which I'm going to be a beneficiary. So yeah, totally supportive of that. We tend to finish the podcast with just a few quick fire questions. The first one is you'd finish the sentence, employee ownership is.
Empowering everybody in the business to have a voice.
Super. My biggest EO surprise was.
Oh, my biggest EO surprise was, well, I've already said that it wasn't a simple thing to do, but the speed in which we were able to do it,
Right. Yeah.
with the right with a willing attitude, all businesses almost certainly could do an EOT.
Third question is really around, and it doesn't matter if it is around a book that you might have read. You could choose the Bible, I guess, Gary, but it was more a business book. I just wondered if there's ever been a book that has profoundly impacted you as a businessman running the Entertainer that would be a recommendation that you'd make to others. There's actually quite a few EO books out now, but it doesn't have to be an EO book, but any book that you've read over the course of the last period of time where you think, actually, yeah, that's really shaped my thinking around running businesses.
Well, I never finish books. So if I read a whole book in a year, that has been an achievement.
Right.
Whereas my grandson reads two a week, um, and I've got many books that I've gathered over the years. Every time I go into Waterstones, I buy another book. Oh, that's interesting, which I then read the first half, and it wanes. So I've got Richard Branson's books, and I've got Mr. Bartlett's book on the Diary of a CEO, and I've got all the books that you would probably have expected an entrepreneur to have got on the bookshelf, but I haven't read, almost cover to cover any of them.
Right.
So, and I and even would be the same with the Bible. I wish I could tell you that I've read most of it, but because I tend to learn as a dyslexic, um, person, but also I don't sit still very often. I'm always on the go. I'm always looking for the next new thing, the next bit of excitement. Um, so I normally learn and pick things up by what I see and what I hear. And for some reason, I just haven't managed to get into podcasts. Um, and maybe more often than not, I've got a clue where my Apple things are that the kids bought me for Christmas a few years ago. But maybe I should try and listen to. Well, I don't actually drive many miles these days, but I probably should try and listen to more podcasts, because that would be easier for me to follow than to try and read. It's just I could read if you gave me 4 pages of text to read. Say read those 4 pages, and they say right, just give me a praise of what you've read. I say I can't remember. I can't remember what I just read. I just don't seem to be able to pick things up from words. It's not the way that I learn things.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, audiobooks have a real good place now, don't they? And podcasts for driving, things like that.
Yeah.
My son is very similar. You don't regularly see him with a book in his hand, but you will see him with his listening to an audiobook and really enjoying that. Final question. You have a bit of a choice here, Gary. A moment of honesty. So that's a decision you regret or a moment of self-doubt. That's the moment of honesty. An unfiltered story. So that could be a difficult setback for the company, and you've shared quite a few of those already. Or a secret struggle. That could be imposter syndrome, balancing work and family, the pressure of being a public face of a company, which you've clearly been as you've built the Entertainer. Any one of those three particularly catch your imagination? A moment of honesty, an unfiltered story, or a secret struggle?
I think it's probably the secret struggle one, and I think it's been the responsibility that I've carried for all of the years we've been in business, but more so towards the end, of the responsibility that we have had, and primarily the we is mainly me as head of the family, towards the number of people that we have responsibility to. And may not have weighed on me every single day, but no supplier's ever said, Gary didn't pay me. No member of staff has ever said, I got paid late. So I yeah.
Yeah, it is a huge responsibility, isn't it? That
Yeah.
that we carry in running a business, and it is that, you wake up at night thinking, what ifs, and yeah, I'm not to the same scale, but I can definitely identify with what you're sharing there. So that brings us to an end. So thank you so much. Thank you for your candor, for some of your lovely stories. I love Rig. That will go in the show notes. Reputation, integrity, and generosity. Imagine if every business had that at the heart of what they do. So it's been a joy to share in your journey, the amazing business that you've built, and clearly the legacy that you've left behind. So Gary, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.